The difference between men and boys is the size of their toys. I slid my Glock 9mm from my shoulder holster and weighed the nearly pound-and-a-half of deadly weapon in my palm, along with the old axiom. If the saying was true, what did my carrying around this puppy say about me? And what would be the female equivalent? The difference between women and girls was the sheen of their curls, the height of their espadrilles, the size of their hills. That was me for you. More than Sofie Metropolis, but Sofie Metropolis P.I. And gender-bending questions like the one I just asked rated among my favorites. Not merely because I am a woman in a typically male-oriented career, but because I am a Greek-American woman of whom nothing more is expected beyond marrying a good Greek guy and providing my parents with grandchildren. Dark-haired Greek grandchildren that will look cute in their traditional Greek costumes in the annual Greek Independence Day parade down Fifth Avenue every March. What made the reflection particularly interesting was that 7 months ago, I came very close to delivering on all of my family's expectations. Good thing I happened across my would-be groom Thomas the Toad's extracurricular activities before the ceremony, rather than after. Even if I still wished I hadn't found him playing an X-rated version of Show and Tell with my maid of honor 5 minutes before that same ceremony. Had I found out afterward, well, I'd likely still be married to the jerk, and probably would be pregnant with our first child, coming to accept my family's promise that Thomas would grow out of his need to show little Thomas to other women. Despite my deep-seated belief that men like Thomas didn't change. They were much like young boys that graduated from matchbox cars to the real thing as they got older, but in the end, they were still obsessed with cars. I shuddered as I popped the ammunition magazine and then pulled back the metal slide, emptying the round from the chamber before reaching across the stick shift and putting the gun into the glove box of the old Mustang I affectionately called Lucille. I pushed the single bullet into the magazine and then slid both into my handbag. Hey, it probably wasn't a good idea to keep the gun locked up in a car that was as easy to get into as an old bread box, so keeping the ammo separate from the firearm itself made me feel moderately better. While the reason I was strapped had to do with my visit to a firing range in Woodhaven, I'd been carrying concealed a lot more often lately. Probably because the one time I'd been caught without my gun recently had been the one time I'd needed it most. Thankfully, my souvenir Mets bat had served as excellent backup against Santos Venezuela, who'd had a long-standing rivalry with his younger brother, Rennie Venezuela, and decided that it was time to prove himself the better ball player once and for all by kidnapping Rennie and taking his place as relief pitcher for the Mets, albeit not the ambidextrous one fans like me had come to expect. Lucky for Rennie, Santos hadn't gotten rid of him and taken his place permanently before I figured out what was going on. Then I guaranteed Santos wouldn't be throwing any balls in the near or faraway future by whacking him in the right arm with a bat he'd autographed, breaking his shoulder. I stared through the windshield at Broadway. Not the Broadway in Manhattan, but the one in Astoria, Queens, essentially the Greek-American center of the universe, despite how hard the Ditmars Boulevard Greeks were trying to steal the title. The waning light told me that dusk wasn't far off, which meant I was late. I looked at the clock on my cell to find it was just before 6. Actually, I wasn't late. Instead, the shortening autumn days had pushed dusk up further than it had the day before. A cool, stiff breeze blew leaves across the street and foreboding up my spine. Of course, my reaction had a lot to do with the fact that I didn't want to be parked in front of my Aunt Soteria's funeral home. Scratch that. I didn't want to attend the viewing of a man I'd never met, but my mother had insisted I come too because, as she put it, it's our obligation as fellow Greek expatriates. It didn't help that Nick Papadakis didn't have any family to speak of. Not anymore. After his mother had passed nearly a decade ago, and his father a few years before that, Nick had been left alone, meaning there were no relatives to grieve loudly over his body. If my reluctance to get out of my car now had anything to do with Halloween looming little more than a week away, I wasn't copping to it. That went double for the horror movie I'd rented last night that featured flesh-eating zombies. Oh, just go in and get it over with, I told myself. It's not like Nick is going to reach out for you from the casket. Perish the thought. I adjusted the rear-view mirror, checking that my light brown hair was neat around my shoulders, my mascara evenly applied around my green eyes, and sighed. I grabbed my black trench coat from the passenger seat and then climbed out, closing the door after me. The leaves that had blown across the street swirled in front of my feet and then stilled, as if daring me to cross them in my new pumps. I stepped on them, relishing the sound of them crumpling under my heel. "It's about time you got here," my mother, Thalia Metropolis, said the instant I entered the east parlor to the left of the entrance. I repressed an eye roll. My mother, the guilt maven of America. Ever since she stopped working at my father's restaurant a few years ago, it seemed she had an endless amount of time to hound me about what I should or shouldn't be doing. And that extended to every aspect of my existence, including my sorry excuse for a love life, as well as my job.